Hello, I'm the Wild Nerd, and this is just basically just an update vlog on Nexus Necronomicon, the game I've been working on for, that's like 2 months now, isn't it? But I've been starting to work on it a little bit more now. I've had a bit more time just to really concentrate on it, and just wanted to share a bit of progress today. So basically the main thing I've been working on has been, I've sort of updated, I think I mentioned in the last vlog, I want to make it some more like static cameras, you know, like scenes which will be action, will have like animation and that in 3D. But one of the other main things which I talked about, I think in the previous vlogs, which I started to do now and started to develop, was the dialogue system. And I've sort of started to figure out a method for implementing a dialogue system, which is still in progress, but I thought I'd just quickly talk about that, basically how I'm doing it, and so far the sort of methods I'm using. So I want to use Twine for actually creating the dialogue and then export it to JSON essentially. So I found this format, which I'll just show you where I added it. So it's called Twison 0.01. There's a website for it somewhere, just find it and bring it up quickly. Twison. So I'm using this. So I'm creating the, obviously I'm creating the dialogue branches in Twine, and then I'm using Twison to export that to JSON. It's pretty easy to use. You literally just add it, point to that URL, and then it can export out your Twine project in this form here, like this, formatted like such, passages, text links, etc. as a JSON. So I'm still getting used to this, but I've basically got, so this is my Twine project, and you know, you can just see it's the typical branching dialogue system of a Twine project basically, and I've got, you know, just the same thing, and then you export it out. So if I was to publish this now, it's done. I'll just do like test. And then I'll go to where that is here, open it up, and it's outputted as JSON, you can tell from that anyway. Okay, so that's that. But basically I've been working on a lot is actually getting that into the game itself. So not that much has been done in terms of like the actual scene building and that. I guess, like, I think in the last one I covered that I was just, you know, making him a bit more ambient, sort of making him look a bit more alive, this sort of thing, and none of that's really changed. Mostly I've been working on scripting things. So I've imported obviously the JSON in. So I exported it using Twison format. It spits it out like this, and you know, you just get this sort of like long JSON file, which you can then import in. So I guess I'll talk quickly just about how I'm doing it. This is subject to change. It's not exactly finished yet. Like, I've set up these multiple camera views, which I was sort of talking about before, so that I can switch between different scenes. But that's just, between different cameras in a scene, I should say, really. I'm gonna have to think about, probably what I'll probably end up doing is have a separate Twine file for every single scene, and then yeah, something like that probably. I really need to think about it. I don't want to make it too complicated really for myself. I want to make this just a solid, polished story game really. I don't want to make it too complicated, you know, like, it's sure it's going to have multiple endings and everything, but I don't want to make it so it's like, you know, you can define 20 different classes of character or blah, blah, blah. Or maybe I will. Maybe I'll get overexcited and start doing that. I don't know. But I'm going to try and avoid doing that, I guess. Okay, so I'll just launch the. So this is the script I'm developed, basically, still in progress as well. Actually, it's not actually finished. I'll just full screen this. How I'm loading the JSON. And then how also, and I want to just talk a bit about that quickly. I'm not going to go over the top of it, but let me just see if I can zoom in a bit first. It's a bit small. That should be better. You should be able to read that now. So I just created a script called load dialog, of course, and then I've added these attributes. So I've added, obviously, like I said before, I've added in that that JSON file. It's just called chap1 at the minute. It might well change in the point future. It's more about getting the actual fundamental underlying logic working. So we had an attribute called dialog JSON, which is just a type JSON, right? And then you can select that within the Cloud Editor, and you can load in that specific JSON you want to do. So you can load in any JSON file within reason, but obviously it has to be structured in a certain way that this twice on spits out the JSON. I've also added a passage ID which specifies the specific passage ID you want to load. Because if you look at the JSON here, it basically has got different. It's actually doing it via indexing at the minute actually. So for example, if it's 0, it finds this, and then this will be the JSON that would load, the text that would load. So for example, if we go off this a second, this is currently set to 0, which is the first piece of text. So you can see it's just the first one. Obviously the links and the buttons are being generated. It still needs a bit of work, but I'll talk about that later. And then if I was to go into here and just zoom this out, because obviously it looks horrible because it's zoomed in. So the camera, actually in a minute the dialogue is here. I still need to tweak this a bit. I've been tweaking it, playing around with it a lot. But let's just look at this bit here. We've got the JSON selected, which I wanted to just chap1 in the assets folder. And then I can specify. So if I change that, for example, to, I don't know, even like 2. I mean, and then next passage ID is something might be used, but it's not actually. So like you'll see now, if I change it to 2, which is the next passage along, the camera's not going to change or anything at this point, but basically it will generate a different dialogue branch. There you go. So I think I selected 3 actually, didn't I? So there you go. So it links it creates the 3 links there for the responses, the text changes. I could even probably change it to like, I've not even tried this, but let's have a look. So I can change it to 5. Not exactly sure what this will even load, but we'll see. But basically the basics are there for having a dynamic dialogue system that can just be loaded from the JSON. And then yeah, use different text there, and if I did like 4, it would be also something different. So we go which is good. I mean, there's still a few things to work out with that, little headaches and everything, but essentially for the core, which is what I wanted to do, which is to load up the text and dynamically create the button responses, which you then check, which obviously still needs a bit of work, but basically that's done, which is good. It doesn't look pretty at the minute. I know it doesn't look pretty. This is obviously going to have some sort of interface. I'm going to have to sort of really think about. This is always a big problem with interactive fiction games like this. Is like, where do you actually place the dialogue, and how do you make it so it doesn't overrun, so it looks good, all that sort of the thing. And yeah, and then obviously the other big challenge I have at the minute is actually, so for example, I need to figure out actually a way that sometimes the camera won't be changing, sometimes it will be changing. I have to figure out a way of determining that. There will be logical ways to do that, but I have to figure out within the buttons themselves a way of determining that, as well as obviously the switching itself. But anyway, so obviously zoom this in again. I'll talk a little bit more about the actual scripts. You sort of get the idea. Basically, it's loading this JSON. It's figuring out where in this passages array each element, each passage is, and then it's just loading that, which is the basics for what you'd want for doing it, getting it to work. Right, so that's good. All good. So I'll just quickly look at the load dialog, and I'll just talk a bit more about that. So on initialization, let's have a look at just see what it does. So it gets the passage data in a variable. That's the asset, the attribute we defined before. It gets the current ID, which is the attribute we added up here. Also, because at the minute, if you look at it, actually spits out in the JSON, but it also spits out the options. So if you look at the end of each one, it's got these options like that. I want to really make it so that I have to do the minimum amount of editing by hand of these JSON files, because this story could get very long, it'd be very laborious and boring. So I've actually added a regular expression for trimming this out, and also within the and you'll see in the JSON that in every, it does also create this links array within this array actually, so it creates that, so I can get that information for the actual options, the response options for example. I can still get that and it still can get generated, but obviously I want to trim it out because it just does spit out these options too, you know, because this is just a format that does that. So I've added a bit, so I get the, first things first, I get the actual, so this is the JSON, this is referring to the passages array, and then I get the index value, which is the current ID which is being passed, the passage ID and the attribute, and then I want to get the text, which is the actual content of the dialogue basically. And then I do another thing to it basically, which is the regex, which I was talking about before. I want to just trim any text that has the double brackets. So that's what this does. It's a regular expression. I just was messing about with it. This is the last thing I did on it actually. So, and just replaces it with an empty string, just empty basically. And then I actually pass the text object entity or element this parsed sort of passage with the removed double brackets, if that makes sense. And then this is just like some variables, so I've got references to the name of the passage in the same manner, and also the links which we'll use later on. And then I've got this this is only a function I only wrote today, so I won't go into it too much because it still probably needs work. It definitely still needs work actually. I've created this load buttons function just down here, and then I'll pass out the passage links, which as I said before is the links which basically determine the responses for each dialogue. And then like I said, this is in progress, but I create a new group, so I need to tweak a lot of this positioning and such and width and yada yada yada. But basically what's happening here is I'm creating a new entity of type group, I'm adding a component, the options for it, again a lot of which is subject to change. I'm still I got all this from the PlayCanvas documentation, some demos I found as well. It seems to work okay actually, to be honest. Like in terms of like the buttons, obviously the positioning, I need to figure that out. I probably need to just make it so it's underneath here. It looks like it's a bit weird just being in the middle here, but that's that. And then I've got this dialogue screen, and I add the child to that. So the dialogue screen is just this entity here at the minute. It's just the screen element. And then at the minute I'm doing a for loop for the actual, so you remember I passed this function passage links, and then for the amount of links that there are, so there could be 2, there could be 3, there could be 5 sometimes. Basically it just creates a new button for each one, which is done here. So it's saying when you want a new PlayCanvas entity, we want it to be of type button, add the component button, there we go. And then we want to just add all the different settings here, again, which is subject to change. I've just added like a default for now. Hopefully you can add an auto. I was looking into that, I'm not exactly sure if it works. And then for this group which we defined above, you know, in here, that's the type constant, we add the child button, so it should add a button. This is remembering this isn't a for loop, so I'll do this several times. Then we add a label. This font asset's just for the ID reference for the font I want to use. Important you remember to add that, otherwise you won't see anything. I always used to forget that with PlayCanvas. You need to add a generic, you know, a font that you've loaded in, otherwise it just won't work. The link text is, again, remembering we're in a loop. So the reference is the I, where it is in the current loop. The passage links array that we've passed it, and then we want the name and the PID. Now I'm not 100% sure if all this is working. This does return an ID with the correct form, but it seems like the name doesn't get added, which is something we're looking into at the minute. But basically then we just define a bunch of, again, just a bunch of properties for that component, and we pass it link text, which is again, we looked it up here. Yeah, so we do that. And then I'm trying to do the name as well, but it doesn't seem to be working or picking up at the minute. And then we add the child label, which is the label we created above, to the button. And then just an event listener for the button itself, and that's the loop. That is the loop. So that's basically where I'm at with it. obviously there's a few different things required still. Like I need to the main thing I really need to set up next, I need to tidy up the interface for a start. I was messing around with scroll wheel, but it was being a bit awkward really. I've got these different cameras set up. At the minute I'm sort of thinking if I can just add them so that each camera has the same PID reference or the same index value reference, that might make it easier. So yeah, it's just like going through a lot of this sort of like setting up of the basic system for the dialogue system. I think I'm now actually probably just over halfway there, which is good. The main thing I have to work out obviously is just organising the switching of the cams, which in theory shouldn't be that hard. Basically, from when I've done it in the past, you just disable one camera with an ID reference, a name reference or whatever, and then pass it another one. So for example, if you start on 0, and then say for example the camera changes and it goes to this camera here, right? It goes to 1 or it goes to 2 or whatever. We should disable it in so enable, right? Enable it for a second. Yeah, so you can see that like there's different sort of scenes, and yeah, that's the thing I really need to work out next. But anyway, the progress has been alright. In terms of the scenes and stuff, not a great deal's changed. Like I said, I've been mostly working on scripting. This is all the same. Yeah, not much has changed. I think I was playing around with this a little bit recently. So the other thing I was doing was just adding a camera for this, but this has not had much great deal done on it. So if I load this scene up now, I loaded in some new assets for mostly for this scene, just generic assets I can use and reuse again. So this is sort of like the outdoor area. I need to work a lot more on the story though anyway, but it's nice now that I actually have the basics set up. So for example, if I went into Twine and wanted to modify huge swathes of the story and the dialogue options, I can do that, export it out to JSON, and in theory it should just load it all up again, right? So that's a good thing. It's good to have just that set up. And yeah, I'm pretty happy with how it's going now. I'm just working on it more, basically, just more concentrating on it more. And once this dialogue system's done, I can sort of crack on, I think, a lot more with just writing the story, writing the options, and sort of, defining the game a lot more, as it were. So yeah, that's the vlog on progress on Nexus Necronomicon. Hope you got something out of that. I've been a nerd. Like and subscribe if you like it. Probably next few. I know I've been promising a tutorial for a while, but like I said, I've been sort of busy with this and that. But data visualization is something I'll probably look into for a tutorial soon. I just released that component in an A-frame, so I've just sort of been tied up with that actually for the last week or so, which is pretty cool. I mean, you can probably do some cool things with that if you check that out. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. And one other thing I was thinking about, I actually want to make it so that you can sort of rotate within reason the camera around and look around a bit. At the present, it's just a static camera.